Good evening. We seem to have made it here. Let me just put my headset on to make sure that I have sound coming through the microphone. And I was fighting with the technology again a little bit. And we will begin. Okay, sounds like we have the microphone. So, welcome. This is the 102nd meeting of the Carl Jung Depth Psychology Reading Group. And I'm going to get the camera fixed. So, tonight what I said we would do was to work on quotes. And my friend Bill is here. I'm hoping some of the other local group will show up. But we can begin. Bill, since you like Gnosticism, a lot of people say, and especially Protestant theologians, it seems, want to say, Jung was a Gnostic, okay? And so I don't think that that's precisely true. I think that he learned some things from the Gnostics, but not necessarily true. So he was always very careful not to talk about Gnosticism much. And I think that was because he got accused of being a Gnostic a lot. Right? But anyway, did you know that one of the Gnostic codexes was given to the C.G. Jung Institute?
Well, they bought it.
Or they bought it, but the money came from some wealthy person.
Okay.
Donation. And so
they donated it to the museum in Egypt.
They did?
Yes.
To the Alexandria Museum, or the
I don't know which one.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Wherever all the rest of them are.
Nakamati, maybe?
Well, I think those are in the same museum.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So it's no longer at the C.G. Jung Institute,
No,
is what you're saying.
Okay.
Okay.
But they had it for a while.
Okay. Well, anyway, Dr. Jung was very reticent about his interest in Gnosticism, and so I thought I would read this two-page as a warm-up tonight. I thought I would read this two-page statement that he made on the occasion of being given the Jung Codex, and the so-called happened. And so you have to go to Stephen Heller or Lance Owens if you want to learn more about Dr. Jung and Gnosticism, and there's a lot about it. But anyway, this is something that Jung himself said. So as a warm-up, I'll just read this, and then I'll see if my friend Bill has any comments. Okay, so this is Jung's address at the presentation of the Jung Codex, and it's contained in volume 18 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, paragraphs 1514 to 1517. It gives me great pleasure to accept this precious gift in the name of our institute. For this I thank you, and also for the surprising and undeserved honor you have done me in baptizing the Codex with my name. I would like to thank Dr. Meyer personally for his persistent and successful efforts to acquire the Codex and for organizing this celebration. He has asked me to say something about the psychological significance of the Gnostic texts. At present, unfortunately, I know only 3 of the treatises contained in the Codex. One of these is an important, so it seems, early Valentinian text that affords us some insight into the mentality of the 2nd century AD. It is called the Gospel of Truth, but it is less a gospel than a treatise explaining the Christian message, its purpose being to assimilate this strange and hardly understandable message to the Hellenistic Egyptian world of thought. It is evident that the author was appealing to the intellectual understanding of his reader, as if in remembrance of the words. If I can reconnect here. Okay. Seems I have been out of connection for a few minutes. How long? Okay. So the general rule, however, is that modern man needs expert help to be conscious of his darkness, because in most cases he has long since forgotten this basic problem of Christianity, the moral and intellectual agnosia of the merely natural man. And agnosia means inability to recognize objects, faces, voices, or places, presumably something that you knew about before. So Christianity, considered as a psychological phenomenon, contributed a great deal to the development of consciousness. And wherever this dialectical process has not come to a standstill, we find new evidence of assimilation. Even in medieval Judaism, a parallel process took place over the centuries, independently of the Christian one, in the Kabbalah. Its nearest analogy in the Christian sphere was alchemy, whose psychological affinities with Gnosticism can easily be demonstrated. The urgent therapeutic necessity of confronting the patient with his own dark side is a continuation of the Christian development of consciousness and leads to phenomena of assimilation similar to those found in Gnosticism, the Kabbalah, and Hermetic philosophy. Since comparison with these earlier historical stages is of the greatest importance in interpreting the modern phenomena, the discovery of authentic Gnostic texts is of the utmost practical value to us in our researches. These few hints must suffice to explain our interest in a Gnostic codex. A detailed account of these relationships may be found in a number of studies that have already been published. Okay, so that was the end of his comments. And I was just reading the comments of Dr. Jung on being given the so-called Jung Codex, which was one of the Gnostic documents that was found in the Nag Hammadi library in 1945. And somebody bought it for the Institute, and then they gave it to him in a big ceremony. And this was his comment. So now we have 4 present, and do you have any comments, Bill?
You need to focus it for me. If you have a question about it, that was such a broad sweeping everything.
Yeah, well...
and I don't have my reading glasses.
Okay, well, never mind. I mean, the thing
one
that...
One thing you mentioned, I think maybe twice, was the idea of well, you talked about Christianity and consciousness, but you also you said something, what was it, about, well, the thing I remember is that Gnosticism wasn't, you said it would be, people wouldn't understand it, or the language would be too difficult. I think it was something you were saying.
Yeah, because there's been a big
I was sort of watching
separation
things
in
going
time.
on. I was going, around here too.
Right.
But, Gnosticism never tried to appeal to a church or anything. Gnosticism was individual to start with, and if you and the whole point of Gnosticism it's a phenomenology. It's a study of your own experiences. It's not a canon or
Right. I had always heard that it was about having the experience of God.
and that's what and so those things they talk about that sort of structure that those aeons and the Sophia and you know all those characters and they have different ones depending on who the main guy was, like you said
Valentinius.
Valentinius, and
Yeah.
there's others I can't think of them, but those things represent their way of their symbols. They were symbolizing something that they couldn't put in ordinary language. And so they were developing relationships among those experiences they had so that they could retain it and communicate with other people who had similar experiences. But for people who didn't have the experience, which is generally the church, the sheep of the church,
They have no clue.
they have no clue, and they never meant it. In fact, I think it's a mistake if you try to give it to people who don't understand it. So,
And you think that that's a mistake today too with Gnosticism?
well, yes and no. I mean, you could say the Pentecostals are Gnostics in a way. They don't,
see.
So I think some of them are doing just fine. And I think just like in all these religions, I think some of them are just off the tracks, and
Right.
off the rails, and feel like they should be able to beat everyone else into submission for some reason.
Okay. All right. The two things that interest me. One is that I always thought that Gnosticism was about experience. And so it's interesting for me to hear him. I have to turn myself down because I've actually, I don't know what I did just then, but hello, I actually have the iPad, which was working fine for a moment, but then for some reason it didn't go. But anyway, I see my friend from Norway here. Must be very late at night there. And I'm going to try to do a chat. So let's see if I can do a chat on the iPad. And if you see that chat, which I just said hello, then that means that we have communication at least via chat. And so what I said for tonight was that we would deal with quotes, Jung quotes. And so I just read that just as the warm-up for the evening. And Sean says he had to refresh to see. And let's see, do I have to refresh? I might have to refresh too, because... Well, for you, John, that's simple. I'm going to explain this to you, okay? I'll come back to the chat in just a minute. There's a new book, okay, which is The History of Modern Psychology by C.G. Jung. And what this is volume 1 of the so-called ETH seminars that Dr. Jung did in Zurich between 1933 and 1941. And apparently they were quite powerful and important because he pulled a lot of things together that are kind of arcane in his own writing. And these seminars were drawing like 400 to 600 people every week. And they were 1 hour seminars, short ones. And he did it for 8 years. And so in these seminars, he really sort of synopsized what he was working on, right? And so there are going to be 8 volumes of this series. This is volume 1, which is the history of modern psychology, but the later volumes are, let's see if I have a list of them. I'm not sure I do. This is 16 lectures, though, this first volume, which just was published on the 1st. And let me just see. All right, I can't find very easily. Oh, here's... Okay, so there are going to be 8 volumes. This is the first one. And then the second one is going to be the psychology of consciousness and dream psychology. The third one is going to be modern psychology and dreams. The fourth one is going to be psychological typology. 4 is, yeah, share that. Everybody's got to find a quote you like to talk about. Okay, psychology of the unconscious, that's volume 5. Volume 6 is going to be psychology of yoga and meditation. Volume 7 is going to be spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola. And volume 8 is going to be psychology of alchemy. Okay, so this is only the first of 8 volumes. And amazingly, the other day I got this box with my copy of this, but it came with 2 copies. So this copy is for John, as John has actually been our most loyal member and has come to be a part of our weekly meeting. And John says, I have a copy of it in my Dropbox, but I think, Sean, what you are thinking of as a copy of it may be, I haven't gone back to check that one, I have seen that, but I think what you're talking about is the notes of Barbara Hanna, which are also called this, but this is just published as of November 1st, so I'm not sure the pixies who managed to provide us with electronic copies of many books, and which are found in our Dropbox, and so if you're not a member of our Dropbox, there are many treasures there, and you can write to skip.conover@gmail.com, and I will make you a member if you're not already a member of Dropbox. And then there's a separate Dropbox for the advanced reading group. But in the general reading group, there is a subfolder called Collected Works. And I'll just let your minds sort of work on that. Those 2 words. There are many treasures there in electronic form. And so you might find them helpful. Now, I'm still fighting with my iPad, but in any case, let me see if I can get my chat up here. Okay, I seem to have it up now. Yes, Sean, it is a lot of data. Okay. All right, let me. So anyway, John, I felt that it was ridiculous for me to try to fight it back to Amazon, so that's why that extra copy came to you.
Great, thank you. I already was intrigued by the history. It gives a pretty detailed history of
Okay, so Mr. Krishnamurti, please use that email address that I just put in the chat and send me an email on regular email, and I will add you to the Dropbox. Then you will be able to access all of these treasures. So,
Is that his real name, Krishnamurti?
yeah, it's actually, where was it here? Mr. Upaluri Krishnamurti, believe it or not. And so we'd be happy to add you to the Dropbox, sir. And so Bill found a quote.
Yeah, I just saw this because we taught you just started out that whole last discussion with Jung avoided the association with Gnosticism, at least publicly, and didn't like being known.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a quote where he writes a letter to someone, and he says, "You're quite right. The main interest of my work is not concerned with the treatment of neuroses, but rather with the approach to the numinous."
Right.
So I mean, if you're talking about the numinous, that's experience. You know, that's an experience, and you're talking. It's like he's not talking about psychology. He's talking about religion. But then he goes on to say, but the fact is that the approach to the numinous is the real therapy, and inasmuch as you attain to the numinous experiences, you are released from the curse of pathology. Even the very disease takes on a numinous character. So, I mean, I see a lot of Gnosticism and all of that.
Well,
Okay.
absolutely. And so the Christian clerics, going back to the time of the Gnostics, wanted to interject themselves between man and God, right?
Yeah.
And that's quite profitable, as we can see if we look at St. Peter's.
Politically, yeah.
Both politically and spiritually.
And monetarily, yeah.
And monetarily, as we can see by the cathedrals in Europe and the cathedrals in many churches on every
Very
street.
unchristian.
Right. But the Gnostics were about having a direct experience with God, which is what the noumena is.
Which is what individuation is.
Which is what individuation is. And so, anyway, John, did you have a thought about that?
Yeah, quite a big thought, actually. You're talking about direct experience with God or of God?
Or a
with the
religious
numinous?
experience. A religious experience.
Okay, so what is that exactly? It sounds rather amorphous.
It can't be conceptualized.
Yeah, I mean, we can only provide general examples of that, right? So we can provide the example that we had at this table one night when I was talking about my experience at the Boston Museum, and I was describing Pollock's painting and the fact that I had walked into the hall and burst into tears when I looked at this drip painting of Jackson Pollock, and that art never affected me that way before. And so for 20 years, I couldn't figure out what had happened at that time. Okay, that I saw this painting, and boom, I had waterworks, right? And I was sobbing. And Bill just said olive drab. And when he said those two words, it all linked up for me in one instant, everything.
It's a good time for another quote. This is Jung too. He says, "A symbol does not define or explain. It points beyond itself to a meaning that is darkly divided, yet still beyond our grasp, and cannot be adequately expressed in the familiar words of our language. So that's the whole point of symbols, is you're talking about past, but you've experienced them, and that's what a symbol is, a sort of a channeling of an experience. Just like a metaphor will take two elements that aren't really of the same class or quality or category and put them together, and the tension that's created by their not being a perfect fit is experienced and points beyond, the symbol itself. So, and that's why the religious experience is always referred to in terms of symbols, metaphors, in art, song, dance.
Music. Thomas Dennis here. Thomas has been one of our regular participants, and he's written a book, number of books, but the most recent one is Never Snickered a Snake on a Stick. That's Thomas's book. But anyway, Thomas says, I've read where the brain is truly altered by practicing or trying to learn music. And Sean Steele says it's from Chopin. Somebody remember that?
Do I remember Chopin or the changes I experienced with music?
Changed by music. I mean, yeah. I think in our lifetime we can acknowledge that 15-year-old women particularly had their lives changed by the advent of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Right.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know.
Nancy, hey, with that.
I've never been a 15-year-old woman, so I won't even go there. I know. I'm not stupid.
Do you have a comment on
I think you can just totally see the entire group of teenagers and young women while they're focused on that stage. Oh my gosh.
But the thing about music, especially if you're performing it, is that you have to let go and you have to sort of channel something, like any art right. form, but especially with a performance, because you almost have to stay in the moment. You can't drift off, whereas I can get up, smoke a cigarette, walk off and have a beer and come back and do something else if I'm painting, or even if I'm writing. Some writers will sit there and drink scotch all day while they're working on. So you can do that a little bit while you're doing music, but it's hard to actually physically play and be in the moment.
Right. Well, I have a album of Gregorian chant on.
That's pretty exciting, man.
Yeah, but I had a numinous experience with it. There was a movie that I watched when I was like 11 years old, and it begins with a scene of a couple of people walking past a cathedral, and in the cathedral are people doing Gregorian chant, so they're hearing this as they're walking by. I have no idea what the movie was, and I have no idea anything about the movie, but I remember that experience of hearing Gregorian chant the first time. And so even today in my car, as I'm driving around Annapolis, I'm listening to Gregorian chant because it makes me feel very open and spacious. And
there's some modern classical music that seems to mimic or come out of Gregorian chants with that sort of. I'm sorry, what's his name? Adams. A modern composer, or Steve Reich, those people, they take that kind of that sort of rhythmic repetition and play with it until you kind of go into a trance. And they're working with that same.
Well, and obviously people that are listening to country western music get carried away by it.
Yeah, but I think that's a little that's not as centering. Like the chants and stuff. I think they make you settle down and into yourself, so that it's sort of an internal. It becomes an internal thing. So much of the rock and roll and so forth, I think, is more of. I get into the world of introverts and extroverts, and I think most of the world is extroversion, and I think rock and roll and country music tends to be extroversion, and it doesn't lend itself, Whereas Leonard Cohen is sort of introverted. So if you want,
Hallelujah. And
yeah, or
so,
Suzanne. I remember when I was a young teenager listening to Suzanne. I mean, I was just totally transported. I was. So.
yeah.
So, can I ask a question about this quote? And that is, what was he trying to do, approaching the noumena with his patients then, as opposed to analysis? Was this different
Well,
than?
that was analysis
Well,
because
but was it analysis in the Freudian cast, or was it something different?
totally different.
It was individuation. He was
Yeah.
trying to get them to individuate.
I actually have a quote on that, okay, which I'll get to. But and so for folks outside of Sammy's Italian Pizza Kitchen, let me just apologize for the fact that the Wi-Fi here is not red hot, and so we'll try to keep it going as long as we can tonight. But you'll need to be patient. Thomas says, good remarks there about introversion, extroversion, and art. Totally agree. And Andy Oxide says, I'm reading The Atom and the Archetype, Jung's letters with physicist, alchemist Wolfgang Pauli. It's amazing. Yes, it is amazing. And Pauli was in analysis with Dr. Jung for more than 10 years. They were friends for a very, very long time. And it's actually Pauli's dreams of his individuation process, which appears in psychology and alchemy. It's a very big section of psychology and alchemy. And it also appears in something else I have here nearby. You want to pass that to John for his. So Thomas says, some artists, musicians seem to be in the introvert flow and appeal to inward people. Others, like rock and roll and country music, appeal to the extrovert. Much more could be said. Yes, obviously. When you said the world is extroverted, Jung's comment was that the United States is extroverted, and I never really understood that. I mean, I'm such an introvert that everything is more extroverted than me.
But you were in another country, you didn't notice. I mean, I was just in New Zealand, and when Americans would show up, I'd go, my God, those people need to tone it down.
Oh yeah, well I felt that too in Japan, because Japanese are so extroverted, or at least post-war Japanese were extremely introverted, and introverted.
Well,
Yeah.
They don't like tall puppies.
Right.
You don't stand out from the herd there, which is, they like that about Americans, but only not in tourists.
So Sean says a little earlier, Sean says, before, when we were talking about the shadow, before the shadow, Thomas, I called, yes, I was very aware of my darker self and how I had to become stronger. And Thomas says, shadow. Life of an artist, says Sean. Um, well, I mean, the interesting thing for me is I was living in Japan from age 15 to age 17. And even though I'm like on the 99th percentile on the Myers-Briggs for introversion, all the Japanese were more introverted than me. Right? And so I felt extroverted.
You were the
You could smile.
Yeah,
you were the master of ceremonies.
right. That's right. Um, let's see. And so Upaluri Krishnamurti asks, anyone here heard of U.G. Krishnamurti?
Yes. Well, I don't know.
Not Jiddu, but
I remember Krishnamurti from the early part of the last century.
actually, right. And actually, I've only heard of him recently, Mr. Krishnamurti, in like the last month or so. I've heard that name. I became very interested in Krishnamurti about maybe 15 years ago, because there was a book that came out called the centenary of Jiddu Krishnamurti. This was, and I became very interested in his philosophy at that time, and he's a terrific example, actually, of what Jung's talking about, because he had been taken over by the Theosophists, and Jung was really down on the Theosophists for many reasons. And so Jiddu Krishnamurti, on his 33rd birthday, he had been, quote unquote, discovered by Mrs. Besant, I guess it was, on the beaches of Madras, then called Madras, but now called Chennai. And when he was 13. And so he'd spent 20 years with the Theosophists, who wanted him to be the new Messiah. Apparently he had a tremendous aura about him and so on. And auras are a real thing, by the way. I'll just describe to you very quickly how you can see that for yourself. But anyway, Krishnamurti had this tremendous aura. But on his 33rd birthday, which was the 50th anniversary of the Theosophists in Holland, he says, I'm not a Messiah. I'm nobody's Messiah. I want no followers. Go away. I'm a Hindu. And the result of that was he was treated as a Messiah for the rest of his life. But I don't know what happened with U.G. Krishnamurti. So maybe Mr. Krishnamurti, you could inform us a little. I've come to understand that certain of my own personal problems derive from being an introvert in an extroverted world and seeking to change myself, generally by drinking the introvert self away. Yeah, that's not the right answer. But we are in an extroverted world, I'm afraid. Anyway. So Sean says, introverts' healing is giving to others from the inner prosperity. Okay, fair enough. I mean, when we were talking about noumena and the psychoid layer earlier, I don't think we used the psychoid name there, but the idea is that if you can connect with a numinous layer of the psyche, then it opens space in your psyche that allows you to heal, and allows you to heal yourself. Your psyche naturally heals itself if it can. But the problem is we get stuck in ruts, and we get put in those ruts by our leaders in one way or another, whether the clergy or the politicians or whoever they are, and we don't have an opportunity to really open ourselves up. But so, John, you had a quote there that was of interest, or
From the Red Book.
okay, go ahead.
It's kind of long, but it's about half a page.
Okay, go ahead.
The world of the gods is made manifest in spirituality and in sexuality. The celestial ones appear in spirituality, the earthly in sexuality. Spirituality conceives and embraces. It is womanlike, and therefore we call it mater cholestis, the celestial mother. Sexuality engenders and creates. It is manlike, and therefore we call it phallos, the earthly father. The sexuality of man is more earthly, that of woman is more spiritual. The spirituality of man is more heavenly, it moves toward the greater. The spirituality of woman is more earthly, it moves toward the smaller. Mendacious and devilish is the spirituality of man, and it moves toward the smaller. Mendacious and devilish is the spirituality of woman, and it moves toward the greater. Each shall go to its own place. Man and woman become devils to each other if they do not separate their spiritual ways, for the essence of creation is differentiation. The sexuality of man goes toward the earthly. The sexuality of woman goes toward the spiritual. Man and woman become devils to each other if they do not distinguish their sexuality.
What was the last sentence? Read the last sentence again.
Man and woman become devils to each other if they do not distinguish their sexuality.
The previous sentence.
Man and woman. Oh, the sexuality of man goes toward the earthly. The sexuality of woman goes toward the spiritual. Is that the sentence?
Okay. So what does that mean to you?
It's just one of my favorite quotes. It doesn't mean a lot. It just gives me perception of the differences.
The spirituality, the relationships of the spirituality to the earth and heaven.
Well, it's provocative, and the one question I have about it is he talking about in the conscious or in the unconscious? Because it seems like the roles are reversed in either case.
Right.
So, for on the conscious side, it seems like woman has a more spiritual aspect, and man the more earthly. But in the unconscious, it seems to be reversed for the sexes.
Yeah.
Would that be correct?
I think that's right in this sense. I only see women at the gym. Okay, I mean, if they're men, old men like me with gray hair, they've had a heart attack or something, or their doctors told them to get your rear end into the gym and improve your health. Now, in my case, because I came up through the Marines and through a specific genre, I have always done physical training. Okay, but when I go to the gym, almost invariably I only see women. Okay, especially during the day. And if I see a man, he's 85 years old and he's obviously had a heart attack or something like that. I mean, occasionally I see some young stud. I mean, there's a few young studs around that are selling gym services to 65 to 75-year-old women who have enough money to pay for gym services. Let's be kind and say it that way. but I very rarely see like 30 or 40-year-old men. And maybe it's just because they're out working during the day when I'm going to the gym. But I mean, even on the weekends when I go to the gym, I so rarely see a man between, let's say, age 30 and age 60 in the gym.
You know, I was in an aerobics class for when I lived in Rockville, and I went to an aerobics class for about 7 years. And because I wanted to work out every week, and I'd go twice a week, I was the only guy there. I mean, one guy showed up once or twice over that 7 year period. They'd come in for a class or two and then leave. And I was just, you know, I was perfectly at home. I was just, you know, about 20 women around me, and it was just fine, you know.
Right.
I mean, because one thing, you didn't have the male thing going, you know, which I didn't have to outshine anybody, and also it was just very calm and pleasant, and everybody was focused on their health. And,
Right. And so that's a very earthy thing to do, actually. But, you know, in my meditation class, my Buddhist meditation class, where I have 5, count them 5, psychologists who meet with me every Monday, and they're all women. Okay, with one exception. There is one man who's very knowledgeable in Tibetan Buddhism, and who actually imports Tibetan Buddhist memorabilia, that sort of thing, you know, singing bowls and things like that. But most of the participants in this thing are women, so they're very spiritual in that way. And if we, you know, take church or even the synagogue, you know, one of the women who was killed last week was a 97-year-old woman. She was at the synagogue. And so in our conscious life, maybe women are more into the spiritual side, but then when you get into the unconscious, then it's men, because men tend to be the chanters and all those sorts of people. I mean, obviously women have come in more and more into being officiants at religious ceremonies, but you know, before the mid-20th century, there were almost none, I would think. At least since the time of the Amazons, or I don't know what, but does that make any
Whereas I think for men, spirituality is more in a conscious sense, is more of a structure, setting up an organization and a structure for presenting that. Whereas for women, it's more emotional.
Right.
On the conscious side.
Right. So
the unconscious side is different.
Right. So
well, if I were to play with that, I would probably, and this is just playing with it because I don't know, but if we're going to talk about men and women, and I think you're right, the men like to do the structure. It's like the men are bringing their spirituality down into something, and the women are no. It's like the women are doing that, because why else would they deal with these religions developed by men if they didn't want some kind of structure to sort of help frame and hold them to the earth? It seems to me that the men are looking to let go, and the women are looking to focus in, because they're already out there, and the guys are too. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense to me. But there's some dynamic there that seems to.
Well, in primitive cultures, the women aren't allowed in a lot of cases to even be at the religious ceremony or ritual.
Well, men are just jealous because the women are already there.
You're right.
No, but I'm saying upon pain of death. So
Yeah.
these are established
really
practices
jealous.
that are men-driven.
Yeah, and
Okay,
well,
right.
they also,
And
if you don't believe the same thing they believe, they'll kill you. And so you
Right.
don't even have to be a woman.
Right. So the men are structuring culture, and you know, with their muscles, and the women are living it. Okay. So here's some interesting questions. Michael Randall says, did Jung say a lot about introversion? Well, yes, you could say he did.
He invented the term.
He not only invented the term, but he wrote an 800-page long book called Psychological Types, which you probably ought to take a look at. It's volumes.
It's a really good book.
Yeah, it's volume 6 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, and
It was actually the first one I read.
and I couldn't even begin to summarize it, but in there there's about 200 pages of definitions, and that's very useful.
But it also gives you his categories, but it talks about them in such a way as you begin to live inside of the ideas themselves. You experience being introvert, extrovert, thinking, feeling.
Right.
You actually go, oh, I know that part of myself, because we're all of those parts. It's just you got to come to realize it. Some of those parts are more emphasized.
I mean, look, if I had my druthers, I'd rather sit over in a corner and read a book. But when I became a U.S. Marine, and moreover a U.S. Marine officer, then you have to be extroverted. You have to be able to project out of yourself and say, this is what I want, this is the way it will be, to your Marines, because they're just young guys and they don't really know what's even happening to them yet. And I mean, one of the scary things about the military, and especially the U.S. military, is how young the members of the military are, because the average age on an aircraft carrier with 5,000 men aboard is 20. 20. Okay, and
Imagine that.
and so these are guys who really do not know what life is about, and even,
Or they think they do, which is even worse.
right, and meanwhile the captain is only a guy who's right at his midlife crisis.
And he's got a sports car too.
Right. He's just yeah, that's right. And when I hit about that age, I went out and got myself a Corvette, and and anyway,
Driving around the aircraft carrier.
absolutely. So Sean says, my theory is doing one nice thing a day heals the collective unconscious. Well, we can certainly hope so. Sean, I'm hoping that the collective unconscious will be healed a little bit faster than individuals doing, random acts of kindness type thing. We need to have been more broadly what our psyche means and what its meaning for our future. In my opinion, anyway. The more people do that, I think it will also help the discord between people in this day and age. That's certainly true. And Thomas says, gratuitous acts of benevolence. Ray, the discussion in yoga classes, women almost always predominate, which is a shame because it seems there's much to learn by we guys in yoga class, even a skillful and knowledgeable teacher. And I've run into a few very good ones in my local area. They tend to be women. And he says the net total of violence in the world might be mitigated could more men wind up in yoga classes. A wild claim, yet as a 20-year practitioner, I think it might be true.
That's them fighting words.
That's fighting words? Why?
Fighting words. Well, I mean, that's just what a man would say.
Right. It's too
Put me in a yoga class.
Yeah, it's too feminine, right?
Yeah, don't tread on me.
Yeah. Thomas says, I saw a terrifying video about McNamara's folly, the use of low IQ troops in Vietnam by Hamilton Gregory, who was in the war and detailed what he saw. Have you?
Wow, I've never heard that.
I heard it like in the last 2 weeks. There was a meme that came by
that sounds like it's
there
so
was
mean. What a mean thing to do.
it had come from from the Russian GRU meme factory. I don't know. Well, let me put it this way, Thomas. I was in Vietnam. I didn't meet any low IQ troops, and actually, Marines don't tend to have low IQ, in my opinion. And so Thomas says, Ray, discussion of the military, the last comment. You know, I think I probably saw a reference back to this McNamara's Folly thing. You know, they were getting in trouble. I mean, very honestly, the powers that be in the United States were getting in serious trouble in the late 60s and early 70s because they were drafting people regardless of IQ. So they were taking the broad range of the American mental capacity. And, but, you know, I'm sorry, I don't have the feeling, I did not have the impression during my time in Vietnam that I was in the presence of low IQ people. I did not have that impression. And if anything, I thought that the troops were at least as smart as I was, and maybe smarter. They knew what to do. But I mean, in fairness, I was brought up in the military, and you know, my father made it very clear to me that the staff NCOs were the guys that were really running the operation. It wasn't the officers, and they should be allowed to do that. And you know, there is an apocryphal story that the average life expectancy of a second lieutenant in combat was 15 seconds once the firefight started, and that was because the staff sergeant would usually put a bullet in the back of their head. and you know, an element of that is true, okay? An element of that is certainly true in the sense that it's really the staff NCOs, not the officers, not the young officers, who are really running the unit. And if they get some second or first lieutenant who's too full of themselves, they're going to end up and getting killed themselves one way or another. So anyway, Thomas is responding here. They lowered the barriers to induction, according to Gregory, by McNamara's need for more men. It frightened him. They were not good soldiers and died in massive numbers in that war. The terrain was impossible. That's what I read. That's what Sean says. And my grandfather won a Grover E. Bell Award for Sikorsky. He went into Korea as a low rank and then ended up being a captain by the end. You know, McNamara was an egghead, and he was pretty far away from what was really going on over there. But I can tell you that I was a first lieutenant, and as a first lieutenant, there's no question in my mind who was running the war and the Marine Corps, and it was the staff NCOs, and I was never going to get in the way of that. Unfortunately, I mean, in a sense, it's right for training in that when we train young officers, second lieutenants or ensigns, we put them up on a pedestal and make them think that they're like little gods. But the problem is, if they actually believe that, they may die. Okay, and it's actually the 30-year-old staff sergeant who's going to keep you alive. And this last weekend, actually next weekend, I'm wearing my uniform to go to a old age home to do an honor salute, which is a final salute to people who are on the cusp of dying. And the idea of hospice of the Chesapeake and other hospices around the country is veterans would rather be honored when they could enjoy the honor rather than after they're dead. and so I actually bought a new set of dress blue uniform only so that I could do an honor salute, because it's actually my privilege to do it for men who may well have kept me alive in Vietnam, and I have tremendous respect for those. And I was lucky, and a lot of people weren't, including my roommate. So.
That's one of the biggest, the most I don't know what, influential, the deepest experiences of your life were with those people at that time of your life. And I mean,
certainly at that time of my life.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to sort of honor those memories.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you honor yourself.
Yeah, and as I've said, the individuation process is ongoing, and you end up living many lives. I mean, I don't know about you or John or Nancy, but I know in my case, my life has like one phases in it. There were certain numinous things that were happening to me at one phase, like the birth of my daughter. She's now 44 years old. She'll be 44, and she has 3 of her own children. But when she was born, she only weighed 2 pounds and 4 ounces. So that was a numinous experience for me, very definitely. But anyway, through my lifetime, obviously the Vietnam War was a numinous period for us in many ways, for everybody of our generation.
It pretty much wrecked the lives of a lot of men.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you go to a VA hospital, it's just, those are a lot of damaged guys.
Yeah. Sean says, the follow me leadership is really noble. Well, it's also absolutely necessary, Sean, because in war, yeah, that's right, in war, and
follow me.
Yeah, and this is they teach second lieutenants that they're God, right? So that they will say, follow me. And then the troops that are 17, 18, 19 years old will follow them into battle, right? So young and stupid. Anyway, okay, we haven't given a chance to Nancy here. So Nancy is with us. And do you have a quote that you would like to talk about, Nancy?
I don't know if I can talk about it very well, but I will read this quote about, starts with, we'll change the subject to dreams.
Dreams,
okay. So, and the quote is from The Meaning of Psychology for Modern Man. And it's a little bit of a long quote. So it goes, the dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul, opening into that cosmic night which was psyche long before there was any ego consciousness, and which will remain psyche no matter how far our ego consciousness extends. For all ego consciousness is isolated because it separates and discriminates the darkness of primordial night. There he still, and the whole is in him, indistinguishable from nature and bare of all egohood. It is from these all-uniting depths that the dream arises, be it never so childish, grotesque, or immoral. The dream is a living thing, by which no means a dead thing that a living situation. It is like animal with feeders or many umbilical cords. We don't realize that while we are talking about it, it is producing. Very interesting. The
Well,
whole
it's
concept.
producing 7 by 24 by 365 too.
Well, that's because it never ends. It's a living thing. It doesn't. As soon as you think you've nailed it, it expands.
It becomes something else.
It eludes, capture.
Yeah.
Because so long as if you're not growing, well, it's like if you're not growing, well, it's like Hillman says, you work the image because you really don't ever. It's not like a concept where you've actually got a container. It's sort of like a channel that allows you to sort of create a focus, but it doesn't really come to a conclusion.
Right. Don, did you have a thought about that quote?
Well, if it's living, if a dream or psyche is living, it sometimes seems to be, like taking a long vacation. Like when there aren't dreams, when there's an aridity of dreams, a lack of dreams.
Yeah.
It seems like it's not always revealing itself. It's sporadic.
I'd say that that one of the important things about what Jung said and did, let me see if I can get this going again, is that he was talking the ego wants to live in a logos world, I think. And actually, Miles Flagg, who's a very frequent participant here, pointed me to a Jordan Peterson tape where Peterson says there's nothing wrong with living in the logos and having everything in the logos, but there's no life in the logos. That's the problem.
Right.
And I actually have a quote here about this point, but the point is that the psyche is a living thing, and the psyche is always trying to help you live your life, right? That's what it does. That's its purpose. And just like every other part of your body, if you didn't need it to live your life, right? And going back to earlier, this is the 2 million year old man. And so the development of the human being has created a psyche. And the ego says, okay, I'm here, and I want to limit it because I can't cope with everything. Okay, I can't cope with everything, so I'm just going to cope with my world, and I'm going to set rules.
The structure.
And so that's what the logos is. That's what logos is. But somewhere I have a quote about dogma and the fact that all dogma falls apart because you want to live your life. And you have to live your life. Let me just see if I can find it.
But logos is also kind of a self-imposed restriction on yourself, because if you really look underneath anything, there's the life still teems under there, and you can artificially shut it down and say, this is the structure, this is where I live, but it's like the shadow. Shadow, well, once you kill the hero, you know, and who's been holding back the shadow, fighting off the monster. Once you kill the hero and let the shadow integrate into your life, then the logos just becomes a useful thing, but it's not a.
Yeah, I mean, it's useful. I mean, everything that we have around us, we couldn't have this microphone that I'm playing with without logos, right? Every physical product that we create is created by logos, okay? Everything is created perfectly. All the rules of how to build this wine glass, or, you know, that carafe, or this placemat, all those rules are set in stone, and they're all going to be made exactly the same, right? But there's no life in that. Okay, so I have a quote here, and so this is thanks to Louis LaFontaine, who runs the Carl Jung Depth Psychology page on Facebook. And this is a quote that's the ultimate fate of every dogma. And it relates, and obviously dogma is the logos, right? Because that's what the Christian church is, the word.
Well,
right?
I think logos is more of a process. It's not like whereas dogma is like a finale.
Okay, so dogma, but you agree that dogma is a fixed word.
It's a fixed logos.
It's a fixed logos, okay. All right. So
Yeah.
the ultimate dogma. The ultimate fate of every dogma is that it gradually becomes soulless. Life wants to create new forms, and therefore, when a dogma loses its vitality, it must perforce activate the archetype that has always helped man to express the mystery of the soul. Note that I do not go so far as to say that the archetype actually produces the divine figure. If the psychologist were to assert that, he would have to possess a sure knowledge of the motives that underlie all historical development and be in a position to demonstrate this knowledge, but there is no question of that. I maintain only that the psychic archetype makes it possible for the divine figure to take form and become accessible to understanding, but the supremely important motive power which is needed for this and which sets the archetype possibilities in motion at a given historical moment cannot be explained in terms of archetype itself. Only experience can establish which archetype has become operative, but one can never predict that it must enter the manifestation. Who could logically have foretold prophet Jesus would give the decisive answer to the spiritual situation in the age of Hellenistic syncretism, or that the slumbering image of the anthropos would waken the world dominion? The limitations of human knowledge, which leave so many incomprehensible and wonderful things unexplained, do not, however, exempt us from the task of trying to understand the revelations of the Spirit that are embodied in dogma. Otherwise, there is a danger that the treasures of supreme knowledge which lie hidden in it will evaporate into nothing and become and ease all shallow rationalists. All shallow rationalists. I love that one.
Why you should allow initiation.
Right. It would be a great step away from what?
That's just the idea that you need, like in secret societies, which are, I don't think are for real, but the idea of initiation to different levels of to the literature, to the histories, because if you're not ready for it and you read it, then it becomes dogma because you don't know what you're reading, but you want to impose it on other people because it says it's right and that's what's right, and by God it's written down, and your authority becomes the damn book and not your own soul.
Right. Right. This is my grandfather, who was a 32nd degree Mason, and he was.
Was he enlightened?
He was not enlightened.
Yes, that's the thing. That's why I think a lot of that's just fake. That's just male ego shit.
Right. So it would be a great step forward, in my opinion, if I recognize how far dogma is rooted in the human psyche, which is not the work of human hands. Anyway, that's from Arianus, paragraphs 488 to 490. For those. Yeah, that's late reading. We'll get into that at some point here. I don't know. Did we address anything about what you thought you read there, Nancy?
No, I don't think so. I think it's so complicated. It is in one sense complicated.
What do you see that interests you in that?
Well, I think I'm very fascinated with the whole concept of how we dream, why we dream. Is it a predictor of something to happen, which Jung does say in a quote, well, in several instances, a dream is a large part of a warning of something to come. The dream, we could say, originates in an unknown part of the psyche and prepares the dreamer for events of the following day. And I think we don't always remember dreams, but is there a circuitry that's going on, kind of a continuing circling of what is going to be created within us? Are we continuing to get deeper and deeper into ourselves, and that's all part of what's happening in our head and the dreams?
Right. Yeah, our unconscious is responding to us and our environment. And it sometimes prefigures because things are happening that you don't necessarily realize consciously. Okay, so Dr. Jung's discovery of the collective unconscious, for example, relates to his time months, but he had 5 dreams which basically predicted catastrophe in Western Europe. One of the dreams was a flood where there was a flood of blood, and another was a dream of the peasant's boot crushing other people.
But point out the fact that he didn't know what they meant.
He didn't know what they meant at the time, right?
Yeah.
And so, but then it so happened that on August the 1st of 1914, he was in Aberdeen, Scotland, giving a lecture, and they learned about the outbreak of World War I, and he said he was the happiest man on earth because he knew that he wasn't crazy, okay, that these dreams were not the indication of a coming psychosis within his own psyche, but they were something that were happening, that were collective and were under the conscious.
So are you familiar with the types, the feeling, thinking,
Yes,
intuition?
yes, very much.
So let's say you're when it compensates for whatever your posturing is, your type. So maybe you're a thinker, extroverted, and sensation. Well, you might have dreams that compensate by bringing the unconscious stuff of your daily life, like the intuitive and the feeling, and that might reveal itself in a dream. So your dreams might maybe make no sense to you because they were really sort of compensating for your unbalance in your day, and yet at the same time, it's keeping you balanced so that you can go through life and not be totally off the wall. On the other hand, I could also see someone like Jung who's really intuitive, where the dream it might also, if he's intuitive in his waking life, it might also show up in his sleeping. So I don't know, how it would work. But it just seems like to me that there's gonna be a compensatory element to dreams that has to do with what your conscious waking, life is, and it's going to give you a bigger picture. So in that sense, you were talking about like being able to see ahead or seeing more than you see.
Right.
That it would give you insights into that if you know how to look into your dreams, or if you remember your dreams, or if you if they're important to you. I mean, in other words, if you pay attention to your dreams, you're going to get a much bigger picture if you understand what they're doing, because I think they're part of your of shaping your consciousness.
Absolutely, and I often say that I think that dreams and visions are being presented to you constantly. Okay, 7 by 24 by 365. Okay, and most of them don't have enough psychic energy associated with them to break through to your consciousness. Okay, so they're just flowing, and they're just interacting with your conscious mind all the time, but occasionally they break through. And so the example I often give is the example that I don't need a radar detector driving down the highway, because whenever the police are active in my vicinity and maybe running a speed trap, my psyche gives me a police car going from right to left in front of me. I see the image. I see the word police on the side of the car. And whenever I see that image, I know that my psyche is telling me, there's police activity here. I don't know.
Motif at all for you?
I think it interprets it as predator. Okay. In other words,
See, I have the same thing about wild animals crossing my path.
Could it also be a symbol? A type of symbol?
yeah, it's a symbol. It's a symbol
It's
of
authority.
a predator or authority.
Because authority is a big thing in your life.
Yeah.
Having been military raised.
Sure.
Right.
Right, but yeah, and who's the boss and so on, and obviously the police are the boss,
Right.
and but anyway, for me that's viscerally connected. So every time that my psyche picks up on something that's subliminal, it's unconscious. Maybe it's the speed of the oncoming traffic that changes just slightly, not perceptibly enough so that you consciously register it, but so that your unconscious registers it. Or, something else happens, or there's somebody flashing their headlights. That's the obvious one. But there are a bunch of other indicia. So when those things start to come through, then boom, I get this vision. It comes up very powerfully for me, and I know immediately to slow down. I mean, I don't have to see flashing lights or a siren to know that I have to slow down for police or fire.
What does that evoke? The emotion, does that evoke fear?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of fear. That's why I say
Startling.
yeah, I think it's a predator reaction, going back primordially. Okay, going back to a time before the human species, when our ancestors. Pardon? Yeah, that's right. And so your ancestor was some sort of creature that was responding to something in the environment, and so we still have those primordial instincts. And so the point that we were talking about on dogma and so on is that Jung believed in the instinctual nature, right? And that we need to understand that there are numinous things that we don't understand. I mean, he said at the end of his life, we know nothing, no thing. He said it in that way. He didn't say nothing. He said, we know no thing about about the psyche, and that's still absolutely true. I mean, because
He must have been very frustrated by that.
he was very frustrated by it, and his point is that scientific method guys want to strap electrodes on your head and see what's okay, what part of the brain lights up and so on, but that doesn't tell you anything about what's actually happening in the psyche. Okay, there's no experiment yet that can hook you up and then project what you're dreaming on a computer screen. Nobody's doing that yet.
Yes, they can.
Yes, they can. Okay, Bill's tell us about it. Bill.
No, I can't tell you about it. I don't remember enough about it. But they don't actually project what you're. Yeah, they do. They've got a way of doing it. I mean, it's like a real low res image, but I'd have to look it up. It's somewhere in my notes at home. You brought this up once before, months ago, and I meant to look it up then. It didn't. It's, in other words, yeah, it does that though.
So you can somebody's got a system that you can project what you're dreaming.
Not what you're dreaming, what you're thinking.
What you're thinking.
Yeah, what you're imagining in your head. Like you can say, think of an elephant, and then it'll project this image
of an elephant,
a low res.
It recognizes it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a gimmick involved or what, but it
sounds like
I know it sounds.
Okay, well,
but this was a
this is a challenge for our friends around the world.
Yeah, I mean, it seems
to
kind
tell
of
us
bogus.
about
it
that.
also sort of like at this stage, what's the point? But I guess down the line it could contribute to something.
Right. So I want to go back to a chat here that's from Art Patterson. He says, "Hi, I'm new to this and I'm learning more about God than I did in the church." And I would say to you, Art, yes, that's absolutely true, because while Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead, Dr. Jung came along in the next generation and said like said Nietzsche's but Dr. Jung found the living God and found where the living God is found in our psyche. And so that's a much longer discussion, but
and God wasn't out there, God was within.
God is within. God isn't out there, God is in here. So so Thomas says he always liked the bumper sticker, "My karma ran over my dogma." My karma ran over my dogma, yeah. It's like that. Now, Sean says, in Leviticus in the Old Testament, you have to clear yourself to talk to God in the tent. Do you feel that's true, or he is everywhere, even if you're in a tainted mode? Do you think it's okay to not want to read the story of Job because a fear of resonating even partially of that story? I don't think it's okay not to read the story of Job, because at least you won't hear me as a Jungian admit that, because what Job realized was that Yahweh has a dark side, and so you need to read Answer to Job. And as it happens, you can do it on Audible, not audible.com, but Audible Skip's YouTube channel, where I've read the entire Answer to Job into the channel, so you can go listen to the whole thing. and then you'll appreciate what I'm talking about. Um, and you know, you may resonate with the story. Yes, if you should you be afraid of resonating with the story? Well, what individuation is about is realizing that first that you have a dark side, and then hanging on to yourself. I mean, deciding for the good, right? Uh, and and civilization generically is about deciding for the good, okay? Because we wouldn't be here in civilization if millions of human beings or billions of human beings now over thousands of years hadn't at some way weighed the good over the bad. Because if we were always destructive, if we were always evil, then civilization couldn't have happened. No? I mean, the fact that we have religion itself.
I'm not sure we're going to last that much longer anyway.
Well, that's the issue, and Sean, that's the issue, which is that are we going to make it or not? Because as Dr. Jung has pointed out, that God has put into the hands of man the ability to destroy all life on the planet. And so that's now a godlike power. Mm-hmm. And we're
not the smartest bunch in the world.
and we're not up to the standard that can handle that much responsibility. I mean, some of us are, but unfortunately, some of us get to positions of power that shouldn't be there because they haven't developed.
Maybe we should try something new. Let's give it all to the women and let them run it for a while. If that doesn't work, then we'll give it to the teenagers.
Not to the teenagers.
We have such
babies are wild. Children are wild. I need to be educated.
But the language could evolve so quickly.
Okay. So anyway, little Gumnut says, I don't have visions that cross the boundary into consciousness very often, but almost every time I get them, they're precipitated by high levels of anxiety and even panic. That's probably true unless you learn how to react to them. My police vision is one that I know how to react to now. But the point is that you have to do, your psyche has to work energy. And so therefore it thinks your psyche is telling you this is important, pay attention, right? I mean, that's what a vision.
If it isn't, I think a lot of times your unconscious is just dribbling out. It doesn't really. So
yeah, maybe
you're sitting there stewing on things, but you're not really. It's not like nothing. It's not as dramatic as a good dream, a big dream.
Yeah, well, obviously, but everything, every time you have a big dream or a big vision, it's because psychic energy has been accumulated for that to make sure it gets through to your consciousness.
Or if you're doing creative work, it's because you've what do you do with it? You tease it out. You tease it up. You keep giving it waste, and then eventually, if there's enough, if it becomes porous enough, boom, you get insights.
Have you ever written down your dreams?
Sure.
You have.
Yeah. I have a dream book I use every day. So Art also says, is dreaming about things that you are hiding?
Well, that's an interesting way to say it, because like is anything in the shadow is something you're hiding.
Obviously. So the answer to that question, Art, is an emphatic yes. It can be. That's not it's not the only thing that you're hiding. In other words, dreams are not only about things you're hiding, but they may be about that. Uh, so Sean says, can you talk about an instance your dream journal has helped you? Oh, yeah. Um, well, Sean, what I would suggest is you go back to the video about Skip's dream in the sheriff's office. There's actually a video of this where I described it to this group. And did we lose him? We might have lost him here. We froze. Oh. The phone may be dying. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to go as though there's still audio, because Sean says there's still audio here. And so if you go to the Skip stream in the sheriff's office, I talked about that in this group at one point, and that was at a time that I was very down on political situations a couple of years ago. And
What could that have been?
Pardon? What could that have been? Well, we're going to learn about the collective unconscious of the United States tomorrow. And so I hope everyone that's listening to this has voted, so that you get your 2 cents worth into the collective unconscious. So we get this one test. But anyway, I found that dream a very encouraging dream, because it said to me that there was a future. You know, there's going to be a morning after, right? Mm-hmm. There's got to be a morning after, right?
Please, please.
Right. So there was a rising sun. It was an eclipse sun, but it was rising, and it became uneclipsed.
That was your dream.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, the dream is much more complicated than that. It's very complicated. But anyway.
The dreams are alive, and I, as soon as you say something, a portion of a dream will always kind of pop up in my memory, and it's like those areas are still alive with me. Those are images and experiences and dreams I had that are still active, and they're still shaping me. So, mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily know what they mean, but they're still engaging me somehow.
Well, that's what we're supposed to do, is take our dream journals and then reflect on what they're saying to us.
Because meaningfulness to me doesn't mean I have to conceptually understand it. Meaningfulness means that there's an experiential resolution or a resonance that nourishes me somehow.
Sean says, I've heard that the most powerful thing to journal one failure each day. Okay, that makes sense. Which is very hard. It's to self-reflect critically on the bedside. Well, certainly, if you are going to do a dream journal, you have to have a plan that you're going to get it very quickly after you wake up. And so I keep my dream journal in a drawer right next to where I sleep. And if I wake up and I want to journal a dream, I pull it out of the drawer immediately and go in to my dining room table and write the dream down right away, because otherwise you lose it. And John, do you have comments about dreams?
I sort of agree with Bill that when I try to overanalyze the narrative and try to figure out what it all means, it tends to destroy the aura around it. But if I paint it, or if I just remember it, and I remember it, the vivid ones I remember constantly. I mean, it comes up several times a month. I think about the dream that I had 3 years ago or 2 years ago or something. And I wasn't really doing that before, but now it just sort of has happened, you know? And I think that is what Bill's talking about, is just sort of honoring the dream as a sort of an admiration of this mystery as it arises, and respect for it.
It's part of life. It's
a conversation.
Yeah, it's a conversation between the conscious and the unconscious, and it's life. It's instinct.
And I remember the ones that really made me feel good, that I was in harmony with the setting or whatever, and had a lot of energy in it, positive energy maybe. It was frightening at the time, but it sort of like, I had one that was a big flood, and I was carried through this big flood, and it was like a cleansing sort of thing. And then I have a really
another dream.
horrifying nightmare that I remember that is, I don't hate that dream. That dream really taught me something, and I don't know what it was. But it's the good and the bad both. They're just like, I'm accepting of them now. Whereas before I was just like, oh, that was terrible, and try to forget it. Now it's like, I honor them. So.
Okay, I guess what we should do, since I can't demonstrate my aura thing, I will do a short video tomorrow about auras. But I'm losing power on the cell phone, so let's set a date for December to get together. Is there
I don't have a calendar.
Do you have a calendar, John? Because my calendar is on the phone, which I can't access right now. Cause
December 3rd is the first Monday. December 10th is the second Monday.
Okay, what's your preference? Either is fine with me, John.
The 10th is the birthday of one of my children.
This is December?
December,
The 10th is not a good day because I have to take my kid out for birthday dinner.
Okay, well, let's aim for the 3rd then.
Do the 3rd.
The 3rd sounds good to me.
17th gets too close. So.
Yeah, too close to Christmas. Okay, December 3rd, we will be meeting again at Sammy's Italian Pizza Kitchen, and in the meantime, Skip will continue to do the online sessions every Monday night at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. And so I'll see you all on December 3rd. Okay. And so, thank you for all being here, and I'm delighted to see that by the chat that you're still online. In terms of the aura thing, this used to be a new wavy thing, but it's actually a thing. Okay, we actually have auras, and that's light around our bodies. And the way you can see it is you take your fingers and you put them up opposite one another.
Okay.
And then just squint your eyes and move your hands up and down with your fingers facing each other, and you will see light passing between your fingers. It's better to do it with a dark background, but there's no doubt that you see it. And so, like, for example, we have this dark wood here. If you put your fingers up and move them up and down, you can see that there's light that passes between your fingers on your opposite hands.
Okay.
Okay, and so that's the easiest way to see an aura. Another way you can see it is when you're in your bed at night and it's dark in your room. You can just hold your arms up over your head with your fingers facing each other on your hands, and just move your hands up and down just a little bit, and you'll see a stream of light between your fingers, between the two hands. Okay, and that's an aura, and you have that aura all the time. Okay, most people ignore it, consciously ignore it, but it's actually there all the time. And so if you but you know, some people, I mean, if you go to a conference or something and somebody is speaking and they're very emotional, you can see huge auras. It's like, you know, it's like the aurora borealis coming out of their head, because they're very into their talk and they're emotional and so on. And you see like fireworks over their head if you know what to look for. And so the way I always teach people is by this trick with the hands. And so once you know you can see it, then you can see it everywhere. Okay, you can see it around everyone's head sitting at this table. And
you can see if they have negative aura or positive aura.
yeah, you see different colors. I mean, there are people that have made a sort of a semi-science about this. So,
Annie Besant.
pardon?
Annie Besant.
Oh yeah, Annie Besant was into that. Yeah, right. So I'm not saying it means anything. I have no meaning for it. I'm just saying it is, and it actually exists.
Pictures of the halos of the saints is about, right?
Right. Yeah, that's where the halos of this come in.
Our Lady of Guadalupe is a huge aura around her.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I.
Yeah, never mind. Anyway.
Yeah, it seems Sean has seen this online, but we're getting shut out of the restaurant and also out of power on my cell phone. So I am going to terminate this session for tonight. And they actually turned out the lights on us.
They turned out, it said 9-9. It's 9-9. That's what they read for the lights.
Oh, said that?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we're done, folks. So thanks for joining us. Let's see.
There's a lot of preparation to come.
Okay.
Cool.
So what?
That was kind of fun, having something for all of us to do.
Right.
Yeah, I think.
Interesting question, Deborah.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, but I'm not Deborah. Okay.
Good balance with how.
And forth.
Yeah. So anyway.
Extemporaneous, as they say.
I didn't even use my quoted today.
What was your quote?
Mine had to do with spiritual.
Uh-huh.